Our speaker has had over 33 years of experience working for NOAA, has had over 28 years as a NOAA officer in the NOAA Corps. He has had assignments on NOAA ships out of Washington, D.C., Florida, Mississippi, and Oregon. And he's going to speak to us today about the many products and services that you'll find that NOAA offers, and we talk about describing the presence of NOAA on the Oregon coast. So I'd like for you to welcome now Captain Rick Brown. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, and I really appreciate y'all welcoming me down here to Walport, or down here to Yachats. I live in Walport. So I've been doing a number of these speaking engagements. Once the selection of the NOAA home port relocation for the Marine Center Pacific was made public, a lot of folks in Oregon were like, oh great, NOAA's moving to Oregon. My talk is going to tell you that NOAA's been in Oregon for a long time, and there's an awful lot of things that NOAA does that we want to make sure that you, as U.S. citizens and folks that live here, are aware of so that you can take advantage of it. I'm going to start my talk out really big picture NOAA, a lot of inside the Beltway, work down to what all the different components of NOAA are, specifically talk about the Marine Center, talk about what we're doing with NOAA here in Newport at Hatfield Marine Science Center right now, and hopefully give you, that kind of a big overview flavor, 55 minutes or so of talking. I've been working for NOAA, as we said, for my entire adult life. I started working for NOAA when I was 18 as a cooperative education student down in the Panhandle of Florida, working for our Mississippi labs. Started going to sea. I thought that I was going to grow up to be a chemist or some sort of industrial scientist, because marine biology and science was always something, well, that's a hobby. How in the world am I ever going to get paid to be a scientist? Well, fortunately for me, the cooperative education, being out on NOAA ships as a scientist, met NOAA Corps officers, joined the NOAA Corps myself, worked up through the ranks, various different assignments, actually had command of 3 NOAA ships at different times, and pulled into Newport, Oregon back in 1980 and said, what a cool little town on the Oregon coast. Wouldn't it be great if I could find some way to come back here one day? Here I am. So I always love this slide because these are just vignettes of things from around the country. Can everybody see this okay? So NOAA, like every good agency's got a vision where we want to have an informed society using our comprehensive understanding of the sciences. Our real mission is to understand and predict changes in the environment, and we're always stuck with the oxymoron of trying to conserve resources while still allowing people access to resources. That becomes a really difficult challenge for me in my professional life because I work with National Marine Fisheries Service. Oftentimes we have endangered species that are being eaten by threatened species and want to be taken by other folks, and we have to find ways to stay in the middle ground and stay within the regulations. The biggest part of NOAA's core values is, as an agency, and again, it's been my only employer my entire adult life, I can say they value their people, we have excellence in teamwork, and we try to produce the best science service and stewardship of the nation's trusted resources that we can. So I want to do this a little interactive. Does anybody know what department within the federal government NOAA falls? This is audience participation, so are we in the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, Department of Defense? Who said Commerce? All right, we have a winner. So I got a few pieces of swag. This is a book, A Good Catch, a illustrator of children's books, Taylor Morris, from just outside of Portland, did this for us. He's going to be at Hatfield Marine Science Center on June 11th, signing 3 copies of this book, so please come. And there you go, sir. Please share that. And I've already sent them to all the libraries, so hopefully the Yachats library has one. So we're in the Department of Commerce. Well, why would you have weather, hydrographic surveys, fisheries, satellites, ships and planes. Why would that be in commerce? Well, that's because it's all big business. If you don't know what the weather is, how do you forecast what crop yields are? If you don't have good charts, how do you bring big tankers and ships and cargo in and out of ports, or fishing vessels in and out of ports? So as they created the NOAA organization in the 70s, they put us under the Department of Commerce. A lot of folks here in Oregon know the director, the undersecretary, Dr. Jan Lipchenko. When I came here 3 years ago, I thought I was going to work a little bit with PSCO and with Dr. Jane. Now that she's in DC, it's Dr. L. And she's the senior political appointee. So she works for President Obama and former Secretary Locke to respond to all of the issues that come under NOAA's broad caveats. Our senior civilian is Miss Mary Glacken. She's worked with the Weather Service, with the Satellite Service. So even as we change through administrations, whether it's Democratic, Republican, Independent, as long as she holds that job, she's the continuity. So she makes sure that the products and services that we develop and we produce are going to be available. We had a number of these positions, Dr. Larry Robinson, the Chief Scientist. These are political positions that have to work their way through the Congress, and you'll see that a lot of those have been vacant for an awfully long time. This is a Washington, D.C. slide because 2/3 of it is in Washington, and about 1/3 of it is actually our field operations. And that's where I'm going to spend most of the time. As I'm talking to kids and other people for like career days, so when you're looking up here, you'll see communications and outreach, legislative coordinators, education office, internal affairs, international affairs, acquisitions, grants, procurements. There are a lot of things that support science that aren't just science. You got to hire people, you got to buy things, you got to build things, you got to have legal advice. So there are a lot of ways for people to get involved in science that might not want to have a PhD in science. So kind of like, where's Waldo? Where's NOAA? We have a number of international offices, but we also are spread throughout the country. Obviously, because we're an oceanographic and atmospheric organization, we're very heavy on the coasts. This little red dot here is going to get a little bigger. So we got Seattle, Portland. This little dot here, that's in Salem. We got one guy in Salem. Whenever you've gone around, if you've ever seen a Coast and Geodetic Survey marker, there's a couple of them, I think, here along the waterfront in Yachats, all of those triangulate back to the Washington Monument. So there's a NOAA employee in Salem, and he covers a lot of the western states. So when there's a construction or something, and they have to move one or relocate it, or they wonder, what do I do with it? Like in Newport just recently, as they were doing all that paving project, they're like, what do we do, Rick? So I found out that's what that dot in Salem is. We have a lot of folks that are out in these Pacific Islands, people that are observers, people that are doing monk seal counts, bird counts, enforcement agents, a variety of things. So we always like to say that we study in NOAA from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean. In Boulder, Colorado, we have a solar observatory. They are monitoring space weather, and people are like, well, we can see weather on the ground, but why do you want space weather? Well, space weather can affect the satellite communications, it can affect the power grid, it can affect a number of things. So with NASA, with DOD, we're the civilian agency that works closely with all of them to study the sun. And we have satellites up there. Ships and aircraft that I'm going to talk about. We also have NOAA's Banned Undersea Research Program. We support a lot of colleges and things, looking at different kinds of underwater manned and unmanned devices, as well as some habitat stuff like that. As for fisheries, it's who I work for, Ocean Service, Ocean Research, Weather Service, Environmental Satellites, Program Planning and Integration, that's part of the administration in DC. NOAA's Marine and Aviation Operations, one that a lot of folks here on the coast want to hear about. NOAA has around 12,000 employees, give or take a couple hundred on any given day. About 6,000 contract employees that are working directly with us. And our budget, this year it's a little lower, we're $120 million, which is not significant out of $4.7 billion. But there were a couple of things that don't get funded this year that are pretty critical to us, like one of our satellites.
So we're a big business. I always like to say that I work for the largest nonprofit organization in the United States, the United States federal government. A lot of times I push this to the back of my presentation because I really want to communicate all of the NOAA research to folks. But a lot of folks are very interested in, oh, the fleet's coming to town, NOAA's coming to town. So within NOAA, we have around 21 ships, about 15, 18 planes. They're scattered from Alaska, Hawaii, West Coast, Gulf of Mexico, up the East Coast, Charleston, Norfolk, Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Most of the aircraft are based either in the Midwest or down in Florida. We have several jets, which can fly up above storms like hurricanes and around them. They can get out to like western storms, do research. The P-3s are very old, surplus Navy aircraft that some of my colleagues in the NOAA Corps are crazy enough to fly into a hurricane on a 45, 50-year-old P-3 aircraft. I love to hear their stories, but I don't want to go for a ride with these guys. They literally fly through the eye wall of a hurricane because that's where the scientists have to get that information. The jet jockeys, they can fly up above it and drop signs down into the storm. And the great thing about the jet is it can get all the way around the storm very quickly. P-3s are a little slower, but we've actually had occasions where it's a good thing they've got 4 engines because one of them lost 3 of the engines, got down almost to a touchdown, was able to get a second engine up and pulled back out. I'm like, I would get off of that plane and never get on it again. So we have a lot of really old ships, but we're extremely pleased that my part of the organization, National Marine Fisheries Service, we've been working very hard to get new ships. So this one down in the ice, this is the Oscar Dyson. Its home port is in Kodiak, Alaska. It spends its winters usually in Seattle or someplace going to shipyards. So this winter coming, you may see the Dyson coming in and out of Newport a little bit. In the Gulf of Mexico, we have the Pisces. So all of these are sister ships. And then we have the Belle M. Shimada. So the Belle M. Shimada is going to be our ship. I'll talk about it a little more. Also up in Alaska, in Ketchikan, is the NOAA ship Fairweather. The Fairweather has a sister ship, the Rainier. The difference, the easiest way to tell the difference other than the hull numbers, so Fairweather's 220 and Rainier's going to be 221. The Fairweather has 2 small boat davits on either side. The Rainier's got 3. So you're walking on the bayfront, you got some friends in town, look over there and say, oh, that's the NOAA ship Fairweather. How do you know that? Well, it's only got 2 davits on each side. One of the best experiences that NOAA provides for teachers is our Teacher at Sea program. So every year we get opportunities for about 20 teachers to actually go out on a leg research cruise. They do a blog the whole time that they're out there. They communicate with their classroom, with their peer group, science teachers from their county, from their state. And so we do that force multiplier of if a teacher teaches a class of 30 and they affect their parents and siblings and friends, and that teacher affects 30 other teachers, and those teachers teach children, all of a sudden we have a lot of people that are hopefully energized and excited about science and marine science. And that's important to me because you can't support something if you don't have some passion about it. You don't get passion if you don't know about it. So the Teacher at Sea program is great. This year I got slots for Teachers at Sea on the Belle Shimada during our offshore hate survey. So the Shimada is going to be the first NOAA ship to come into Newport to the new home port. The first Teacher at Sea is going to be a teacher from Portland that's going to join the ship here in Newport and go offshore, and she'll come back into Canada. But I thought that was really great for us, for the state of Oregon, to have the first Teacher at Sea from the new NOAA home port to actually be an Oregon teacher. So does anybody know how many ships are going to be home ported here in Newport?
6.
I haven't heard the right answer yet.
1. 6.
4. Who said 4? All right. So more swag that hopefully is in your library. we do a Teacher at Sea book every other year. We've got 3 Teacher at Sea and 1 Teacher in the Air. And these are great books. Hopefully it's in your library here. That it tells a little bit about NOAA. It tells a lot about that teacher's experience. So who was the lucky person that said 4? All right, you got a NASA shirt on too. When you work for NOAA, NASA's a bad word because they have all the publicity. When I tell people that I work for NOAA, they're like, oh, the Navy Oceanographic Association or something. It's like, whatever works. So hopefully a lot of folks, if you've gone to the Port of Newport website or you've seen things in the paper, this is what it's supposed to look like. You know, you got a nice little administration building, you've got a warehouse and some electronic space and a 1/4 mile of concrete with 2 access ramps and space for how many? 6 ships. Well, why do we have space for 6 ships if only 4 are coming? Well, that boat, those 2 boats in Alaska, the Fairweather and the Dyson, they usually come south every winter. You know, it sounds nice to have them home ported in Alaska for dear departed Senator Ted Stevens. But the reality is we can't do a whole lot for them up there. So I haven't gotten a good recent aerial photograph, but back in February, you've got an administration building, you've got a warehouse electronic space, got some hazmat sheds out here now, you've got a 1/4 mile of concrete. They turned the keys over to NOAA May 1st. Everybody's like, well, they turned the keys over to them. Where are all the people? Well, we had to get the official occupancy of the building because the contractors built it to spec. If the NOAA guys that are running the cables for IT come in and break a window, poke a hole through the wall, do something, the contractor's going to be like, your guys did that. So we had to receive beneficial occupancy so that we can now start putting the government on furniture, doing some of the IT modifications, doing things like that. That's been started and it's ongoing now, and a number of people, I guess there's probably 4 or 5 NOAA employees that are there working regularly now. But they'll slowly get the place ready for occupancy, and then through June and into early July, people from Seattle will have to make the tough choice, do I move or do I stay? A lot of folks are waiting to the very last minute to see if they can do something else. The good news is that the jobs that are needed to be done, if the person from Seattle elects not to relocate, would then be advertised down here. So we've had a number of positions that have already been advertised. If you go to the usajobs.gov, usajobs.gov, you can go in and fill out a number of things where you can see jobs that are advertised here in Lincoln County. You can do it, you know, by zip codes or by state. You can do it by specialties. I've got 3 or 4 different things that give me alerts, and I'm amazed at how many federal jobs have been coming open recently, and not a lot of them with the Marine Center.
What's going to happen to Mount NOAA?
Bite your tongue. There is no Mount NOAA. There is no Mount NOAA. That is the Mount Port of Newport. All of that sand, guess who all that sand belongs to? It belongs to you as Oregonians because the Port of Newport took it out of your harbor. So the state and the port and a whole bunch of folks are in all kinds of uproar over what are we going to do with the sand? The port wants to just give it away to get rid of it. The state's like, well, wait a minute. Phil has value. You know, maybe we want some return on that sand. The creation of the Mount Port of Newport. So this whole area out here used to actually be filled, and it was pretty much just a little above most of the tide line. As they were dredging out here, especially this is a small boat harbor, so there'll be a couple of small boats and some dredge work along here. They damaged some eelgrass bed area, so we had to mitigate for that loss of eelgrass habitat. So what they did was, where this used to kind of come straight out to here, they scarfed away all of this. You might have seen they kind of put a cofferdam up on the outside of dike, and then they pull this back in. Well, they put all that sand up here. And if you're a boater in Yaquina Bay, you're all saying, I'm so glad the dredge pipe has finally been moved from the bay, because a lot of the other dredge material from the outside was pumped across the bay over to the big LNG tank to the port's property. So there's a lot more sand over there as well. But the Mount Port of Newport Hopefully they'll get rid of it before it gets dry and the wind blows it all over the place. But we're also very hopeful that the eelgrass mitigation, we dug up a lot of eelgrass before they started all the work. We planted it behind the aquarium. It's doing really well. So they're going to take some of that and put it back over here and hopefully see that'll grow. So this is the NOAA ship Miller Freeman. It's a 215-foot stern trawler. It has been working actively in the NOAA fleet since the late 70s. It was the first NOAA ship that I served on as a NOAA commissioned officer. I did the first repair to extend life down in Reedsport, Oregon, back in 1982. It's 2011. It needs repairs to extend its life even longer because we're still trying to get a replacement for this vessel. This ship has been our go-to stern trawler research platform, looking at ocean research for the entire California current on the west coast, Gulf of Alaska, Bering Sea, up to the ice edge. This has been the workhorse of the NOAA Fisheries and Living Marine Resources fleet for the west coast for years. We need about $15 million to fix it so it will last another 5 years until we can get a replacement vessel. The repair request was in the President's 2011 budget, which never got passed. This is one of the ships that's going to be homeported in Newport. It's right now sitting in Lake Washington, pending funds to do the repairs. So we're really hopeful that we're going to find the money, maybe early in 2012, so that we can get these repairs done, because it's critical for us on the West Coast to have this ship to be able to do the work that we do. This is the NOAA ship MacArthur II, to replace the older NOAA ship MacArthur. It's a converted Navy Tiegos platform. The Tiegos platforms were built to fight the Cold War. They're acoustically fairly quiet, and they would tow submarine sensing cables through the North Atlantic and North Pacific. There were an awful lot of them that were built by the Navy, and fortunately for NOAA, there were a lot of them that were being built right as the Cold War was winding down. So NOAA's been able to get several of these. I was a commanding officer of the sister ship, the Gordon Gunter, which is down in the Gulf of Mexico. The MacArthur II, we use it for a lot of southern resident killer whale surveys. The killer whales stay in Puget Sound through most of the summer, but in the winter months, as the salmon have left the sound, they're offshore. We're not exactly sure where they go offshore, but we know that's where a lot of the mortality occurs. Southern resident killer whales in Puget Sound are a threatened and endangered substock of the whole Pacific killer whale population. So we're very interested in protecting them. I mean, they're iconic megafauna for the Northwest. You see everything from Native American drawings and things of killer whales to all of the folks that have transitioned from maybe commercial fishing to whale watching or other ecotourism. So the work we do for killer whales on the MacArthur II is very important. It also does a lot of work with the sanctuary folks up at Olympic Coast. It does work with sanctuaries down in California. We use it to do some of the process studies that I'll talk about near the end of my talk, which are looking at ocean conditions. The MacArthur II is currently in the Gulf of Mexico. It's working on Deepwater Horizon projects. We had a ship operations budget request in the 2011 budget. The 2011 budget never got passed. So fortunately for the crew on the ship, there was oil spill money made available, so it went through the Panama Canal, and it's worked there all this year. So that meant I didn't get any time on it this year. But I'm really hopeful that it's going to come back through the canal at the end of the year, and hopefully it'll be in Newport sometime after October or November. Or maybe it'll be in the Gulf. I don't know. We'll have to see. So which of the hydrographic survey boats is this? Well, this is the Rainier, because it's hull number 221 and it's got 3 davits on each side. So unlike the Miller Freeman, the Bell Shimada that I'm going to show you, and the MacArthur II, which take out a lot of scientists, the Rainier and the Fairweather and ships on the East Coast, they produce nautical charts. So the only way you can go out and validate those is to conduct surveys. So they do them both with autonomous underwater vehicles, It's kind of like a computer program torpedo that has sounding devices on it. Program it, put it out there. It validates the depth of the water in the various parts of certain bays and things. They also send the launches out, the launches to a side scan, and they also have multi-beams in the hull. They collect all of that data, come back, go through a very rigorous international process to produce those nautical charts. I'm old enough to where I spent many, many hours correcting paper charts. Nowadays, it's almost all electronic charts. So it's so much more efficient as long as the computers in the chart program work. But these folks, they leave with their own crew working that primary mission. It may be in California or Hawaii or Alaska or someplace else on the West Coast, but it's a really interesting and valuable service that they provide to get these nautical charts produced. Anybody mariners in the audience? I mean, anybody use nautical charts? All right, so we got a sailor back there. So the pride of Newport is going to be the Belle M. Shimada. This is the fourth of 5 of the new fisheries survey vessels that we're building. It's going to be dedicated to the West Coast. Unfortunately for us here in Newport, the NOAA ship David Starr Jordan was decommissioned rather suddenly 2 years ago to save some money and also because it was an old platform. So I have to share this platform with the folks down at La Jolla and Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Belle M. Shimada is a 220 foot. She's got a number of officers and crew. It'll carry up to 19 scientists, has about 20 officers and crew, carries about 19 scientists. Has stern trawler capabilities. It has about 10 different kinds of labs. These ships are amazing in that they're one of the few acoustically quiet fisheries research vessels in the world. Scotland's got one, Norway's got a couple, Japanese have a few. America's got 4 and we're building a 5th one. We sell them on, well, if it's really quiet, it's not going to affect the environment or affect the behavior of the animals that we're trying to study as much. But an even bigger point is that we're doing so much more with acoustics for our science to where we're actually counting fish using the echolocation capabilities of the multi-beam transducers on the ship, that not radiating noise means that there's less noise that has to be filtered out as the signals are returning. So that low SNR is a huge value of these platforms. On the starboard side, that's really the business side of the ship. It's got these 3 oceanographic winches right here. So we'll be doing plankton work, oceanographic bottle casts, CTDs, maybe doing other kinds of work. It has a couple articulating cranes. This is great for picking up trawl doors and nets and things like that, but we can also launch autonomous underwater vehicles or other devices over the side, pick those back up. The trawl winches are actually below deck, and it comes up through the gallows to come out, so the doors would be here on the stern or here on the shoe on the side. The current commanding officer, Commander Todd Bridgman, was my executive officer on my last command at sea. About 12 years ago, I wrote up an assignment for him to come here to Newport. And as I was writing up his assignment, I also wrote up one for me. So I came here and helped to build the Barry Fisher building that you see at the Hatfield Marine Science Center. His XO was my field operations officer. And their junior officer was a person that we helped recruit into the Corps. So there's an awful lot of connectivity for me personally in this ship. The biggest piece is, does anybody know who Belle Shimada is? So Belle Shimada was one of our Japanese-American researchers from California. He was esteemed for his knowledge of tuna migration patterns, things like that. I don't know exactly, but I believe that his family was involved in some of the World War II internment camps, came back out, got his PhD, became an esteemed scientist. He was selected to be a laboratory director for one of our labs down in California to work on this tuna research. He had been in a meeting in the tropical Pacific with Dr. Townsend Cromwell. As they were returning, the plane crashed, and unfortunately he met an untimely end. He did have a daughter and a son. His son, Alan, works for National Marine Fisheries Service. He's a really good friend of mine. He works in our Office of Science and Technology at headquarters, and he's intimately involved in working on the scheduling of all these ships and making sure that the scientists get access to the platforms that they need in order to do the research, to collect the data, to do the stock assessments, to study the migration patterns, to look at the ocean condition changes. Under my last assignment as a NOAA Corps officer in Washington, D.C., I was the special assistant to the administrator of National Marine Fisheries Service, so a fairly high-level political. He assigned me to be the fisheries representative on the NOAA team that was going to work with schools to name the new NOAA ship for the West Coast. So, knowing Al, knowing his father's story, knowing that there were a number of schools on the West Coast that would think that would be a compelling argument, I worked closely with a lot of friends. They had a couple of really good submissions. We were able to convince the selection committee that I was sitting on that Bell and Shimano would be a great name. So there you go. So I'm living in Newport, or living in Walport, working in Newport. We were talking when they were assigning ships, like the Dyson is up in Kodiak. That was a Senator Ted Stevens deal. You're going to put a ship in Kodiak. We're going to have a home port in every district. We were saying, well, why don't we put the Shimada in Newport? Because we could expand the OSU dock, and we could bring it here. And, you know, Commissioner Thompson and a number of us that I'm a federal employee, so I have to be very impartial about this, had some discussions, and we said, well, that would be a great thing, because this ship does so much, is going to do so much work for us on the West Coast. So a lot of times now, if you hear Terry talking about the Marine Center Pacific in Newport, he says, we wanted the Shimada, and they said that it would go to wherever the home port was selected, so we just had to get the whole home port. So we brought the entire fleet here to Newport so that Rick could work in Newport, have his, his friend be the commanding officer, and have this ship tied up to a brand new dock. My life is really good. The folks that are going to be working here in Newport, they don't just service those 4 ships. They service all the ships in the Pacific. So the 2 in Alaska that I already talked about. In Hawaii, we've got 3. These are all those Navy TA ghosts, like the MacArthur II. So the one on the top is the Oscar Elton SETI. It does primarily fisheries research. The one down in the lower left-hand side is the Hi'ialakai. It works in the National Monument, which is one of the largest marine protected areas in the world. So the entire Northwest Hawaiian Islands National Monument is just, it's amazing that President Bush set that aside and that we have that as a dedicated place with certain protections to try to maintain that pristine environment. Then the Kaimi Moana services the Togatawa Array. So that does the El Nino, La Nina forecasting. It's looking at the equatorial heating and cooling of the ocean currents. So, has anybody noticed it's been raining a little bit lately? Thank you, La Nina. You know, it's like I never thought I'd want an El Nino year because that's when we get even more wind. But for us here in Oregon, I would much rather have a lot of rain than tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, all those other things. So these boats are in Hawaii. There's not a lot of big shipyards in the islands, so they often come to the West Coast. They will probably be coming to either, Portland for shipyards, San Francisco, maybe up to Seattle. So as they're on the West Coast, you may see one of these 3 boats coming in and out. And again, that's why we have berthing for 6, even though we only have 4 that are going to be dedicated to be home ported here in Newport. Where I'm from, down in Mississippi, and every now and then it comes out a little bit, especially when I'm talking on the phone back to Mama and stuff like tomorrow. But they build the ships, the first 4, on a series of marine railways. They build them in sections, actually upside down. Then they invert it to the correct orientation. We have a big launch event where we bring in all the politicals and everybody gets to watch whoever the namesake for the boat is. The sponsor break the bottle of champagne. The shipyard workers pull the keepers out from under it, and the ship goes flying off into the bayou. Now, all of y'all are from Oregon, I'm figuring. At least you've been here for a little while. So when that ship hits the bayou, which is kind of shallow, and it slides out to where those 2 tugboats are sitting there to keep it from going aground on the mud flat, all this water down here pulls way out. If you're in Oregon and the water all of a sudden goes way out, what do? So you'll notice that I'm up here on this, up high, taking this picture. All these folks down here and there's somebody go to meeting close, all of a sudden that body comes all the way back into about right here. So they're all walking around for the rest of the reception with, water marks up to their knees. So that's, we never have the heart to tell them not to stand down there because everybody wants to be close. This was the Dyson, the ship up in Alaska. So the good news is that with the ARRA money, some stimulus money, $74 million was put into building a replacement for the David Starr Jordan, the boat that traditionally services Scripps Oceanographic Institution and our folks down in California. The name was just released. Dr. Reuben Lasker, another preeminent fisheries researcher, passed away several years ago. This boat's under construction in Wisconsin. I'm going to be going back there in June for the keel laying. One of Reuben Lasker's granddaughters is going to be the sponsor for that ship. It'll look a lot like the Dyson and the Belchamot and the Pisces. Right now, those folks in California think it's going to be home ported in San Diego. We're working on it. So I was talking about the NOAA Office of Education. Education and outreach is a huge, important component of what NOAA does. If you know people that are doing homeschooling, teachers that are looking for materials to add to their mission or to their lesson plans that can somehow borrow from material that's already produced, if you go to the Office of Education website or you go to one of the NOAA websites and you just type in teachers, I typed in 4 teachers, I get a weather service, I get a National Marine Sanctuary, you get Office of Protected Resources, whales, dolphins, turtles, salmon, Technology Office, Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale Sanctuary, Education for Teachers. The web has huge resources that a lot of NOAA components that are funded by your taxpayer dollars are producing because we want to make sure that we're doing that stewardship and that outreach. And so if you're looking for a topic, you can Google it or you can go to a NOAA website and hopefully that'll get you to it very quickly. One of the great things about NOAA and the fact that we have so many different disciplines from the hazards folks and the folks that are doing the modeling, when we have events like Exxon Valdez, unfortunately, the recent Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico, we can pull together the resources that we have to do what NOAA does best, which is forecasting and looking at impacts. So as soon as we had the Deepwater Horizon spill, we started pulling in people from all over the country. I personally last year spent every third week for 4 months down in Mississippi working on getting boats chartered to go out to do the sampling to make sure that we could open up areas to seafood collection, to commercial fishing, to make sure that there was no oil or residue for those products out there. I had a lot of folks that were involved in identifying and helping sea turtles, birds, things like that were affected by oil. A lot of other parts of NOAA were doing the modeling to see where's the oil going, what's the oil doing, how can we try to mitigate and minimize the damage to something that's this catastrophic. So my little piece of it, every one of these numbers and dots, that's a place where we arranged for a boat to go out and sample not once, not twice, but 3 times. Only after we had had 3 replicates of samples from each of these blocks, they came back clean, and we only had a few false positives. We didn't get any oil positive tests. We would look at shrimp, we were looking at finfish. We weren't looking at the crabs and oysters because in the Gulf of Mexico, that's really a nearshore in the state waters project. So states, Louisiana, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, we're all working inshore waters. But I was personally able to help us get those samples, and we actually got BP to pay for some of the charters. We got BP to pay for some of the man hours and labor to get people out there to collect that. And because of Exxon Valdez, some of the greatest expertise in analyzing seafood in the world is at our National Marine Fisheries Service lab in Seattle, Washington. So a guy from Newport was sent to Mississippi to collect samples. We do chain of custody because all this is going to get legal and ugly. And that's why this says, please don't distribute, but this is one from December, so I'm probably okay. I was working there in Mississippi to get that chain of custody, get those samples, get them overnighted to Seattle, to the laboratories. We had people working 20 hours a day in the various labs running those samples, because the worst thing that could happen to the seafood industry would be for anybody to get sick from any oil or petrochemical product in seafood. So finfish, if they did eat something, it probably passed through them very quickly. We never got any positive samples, and we were very cautious. We opened up kind of like a donut hole. We kind of did this, and then kind of slowly worked our way in. And then just on the 1-year anniversary did we open the block that was right there where the Deepwater Horizon was. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the line offices. So I work for the National Marine Fisheries Service. Our director sits in Silver Spring, Maryland. We have offices up and down the coast that are divided up into science centers. So I'm going to tell you more about the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, which is the one I work for. But we have scientists that are working with dedicated research vessels like NOAA boats, going out on university boats. We work collaboratively with a lot of our university partners. We work with international partners. Fish have tails. We don't call them highly migratory species and stocks for nothing. It's an international issue. We also charter a lot of commercial fishing vessels because the NOAA fleet and the UNOLS fleet, the academic fleet, can't take care of all the work that we have to get people out on the water in order to do. So these two boats, the Miss Julie and the Noah's Ark, are two of the boats that we use here routinely. So like probably in another couple of weeks, you'll probably see these two boats getting outfitted down at Eglin Marine here in Yaquina Bay, getting ready to go out and do the West Coast survey. A lot of times people say, well, why do you do what you do? I mean, you've got fishermen and we've got state laws and things. Well, we also have over 100 federal laws. Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Management Act, that's the biggest one for us. That's the driver that gives the legislative mandate to the Secretary of Commerce to manage fisheries across the United States. Marine Mammal Protection Act and Endangered Species Act, that's kind of what I alluded to earlier, that creates a little bit of a challenge for us when I have a protected marine mammal eating a threatened or endangered salmon or sturgeon. So, Environmental Policy Act, if you've ever tried to do anything in the water, you have to go through NEPA. I have to go through NEPA. So all of these laws are why we do what we do. In addition to the commercial fishing, there are a lot of fishing operations like recreational fishing where the recreational fishermen actually take more of some stocks than the commercial fishermen do just because of where they're located or how they're distributed. So we have a big recreational fisheries program as well. Anybody know where this is? No? Think a little further north.
Drift Creek.
Okay, think a little further east. Moonshine? So that's at Moonshine. So that's another good thing. If you know people at headquarters say, hey, do you have a great shot of a dad and a kid fishing? So I send it up there. So now, we in NOAA presentations all over the country for recreational fishing, we'll have Moonshine Park. In addition to the Fishery Service, we've got the National Environmental Satellite Service, the National Weather Service. Most folks have heard of the National Weather Service because that seems to affect your daily life the most. Everybody wants to know how windy is it going to be, how much rain are we going to get, when is it ever going to get above 60 degrees, am I ever going to grow tomatoes on the Oregon coast? The Satellite Service is probably the newest part of NOAA, but it's one of the most critical because as we're using more and more remote sensing, people just take for granted that you flip on the TV, you go to the NOAA website, you can pull up satellite images, satellite data. Actually had a, kind of like this year, our polar orbiting satellite has been put on hold for another year. we had a hearing several years ago when I was working in Washington, D.C., and literally had a congressperson say, well, why does NOAA need money for another satellite? I turn on the Weather Channel and they have satellite images. Why does the federal government need to buy them? Needed some education and outreach to that constituent, so we made sure that we informed them of where the public sector got that satellite imagery from. National Weather Service, it's amazing what my colleagues in the Weather Service do. When you look at how much better tornado forecasting is, I can't stop it, I can't turn it around, but if I can warn you, maybe it'll save your life. My parents live in Raleigh, North Carolina. A couple of weekends ago, they were getting ready to go out and have dinner on a Saturday night. The NOAA weather radio that I gave them started going off very loudly and saying that there was a line of severe thunderstorms and great possibility of tornadoes coming through. So my mom and dad prudently decided to stay home. A Lowe's hardware store very close to where they live, the one that my dad shops at routinely, is the one that you saw in the news where the roof in the parking lot and everything had been ripped to shreds. These things can save your life. Much like everybody knows that if we heard the tsunami siren, we'd all head for the nearest piece of high ground. Being aware of the weather, being aware of what's going to be forecast is critical to your ability to maybe save your life sometimes, but other times to be able to enjoy the day. I like the one with the tornado and the lightning at night. It kind of brings other pieces of the whole picture together. And the hurricane, which the name escapes me right now, but the reason I love this one is that, once again, the Congress is really good when it comes into the Gulf of Mexico and wipes out Texas or New Orleans or Mississippi. It's like, oh, that's bad. Well, this one went right through D.C. So I always like those opportunities for education and outreach. In your backyard, this is why we give you a 7-day forecast. If you don't want a 7-day forecast, well, that's not a good thing. So I pulled this off the web yesterday. Does everybody know how to get to the NOAA weather site? Yeah. If you just go into www.noaa.gov, there'll be a little box where you can type in your zip code. You can type in the name of the city. It'll pull up a pretty good 7-day forecast. It'll give you some narrative. So for Saturday, 80% chance of showers, high of 52. Tonight, showers 52, or showers 44. It's pretty close. I mean, it was raining around Seal Rock when I just drove back from Lincoln City tonight. So probably 80% of the space had some rain on it. As you scroll down this page, at the bottom on the right side, there'll be a radar loop and there'll be a satellite loop. If you want to see what weather is coming our way, you can click on that radar image and you will get the most recent radar imagery. It's the same thing that if you go to channel 6, 8, or 2, same place that they get their radar from. On the other side will be a box for satellite imagery. So you can pull up water vapor, you can pull up infrared, a number of different things. You can look at the entire Pacific, you can look at just the Northwest. Again, it's a piece of data and service that's available for you. Anybody know what these are? All right, so I heard a buoy. Yeah, so that's the weather buoy. So this is Seaman buoy out at the Stonewall Bank. Anybody know where this guy is? Come on. No. This is the weather station that's on the South Jetty at Newport. So as you go to that web page and you go down, if you click on marine forecasts, on the left-hand side of that, it'll have a whole bunch of other data you can get. And it'll say buoys or data points. You click on the buoys, you can actually click on the South Jetty and you can get the current weather, you can get the recent history of that. I always love to send to my father back in North Carolina the Cape Fowl weather forecast because it's blowing 80 or 90 on top of Cape Fowl weather. And it's only blowing 65 or 70 over my deck. But these are right offshore. This is right at the end of the South Beach Jetty. This is the data points that go into the models that the Portland and Salt Lake City, Utah meteorologists are looking at as they're compiling their forecast. So I talked about satellite imagery. This is a GOES satellite from yesterday. So it was kind of showing this bunch of moisture that was coming ashore, had a couple little breaks in it. So I think that was pretty good. This is the southeast GOES. So we've got, you know, a line of thunderstorms coming down here, Gulf of Mexico. Anybody have any idea what these were? Right through there? No, this one's a little more recent than that. That was a good one, Sharon. So Sharon used to work with me several years ago.
The fires in Texas?
Sharon. That's the fires in Texas. So literally, they also, in addition to marine weather, they do fire weather. So we're looking at how dry the, I keep calling Karen Sharon. It's bad. It's little ways of validating the model. So we're taking observations, producing numerical models. We've got a bunch of geeks that play with computers, and their video game is forecasting what's happening based on the atmospheric conditions. So this is one more tool for doing that. So we have NOAA's research element. That's the El Nino, La Nina forecasting, looking at ocean temperatures. They also do a lot of other work. One of the things they do is they put out these tsunami buoys. Many years ago, before the Indonesian tsunami, we had a handful of the buoys out there. The technology was kind of proven, but there wasn't a lot of interest in having a tsunami network in Washington, D.C. because it's expensive. You have a couple of buoys that are out in very remote locations. It's very expensive to get ships out there to maintain them. And, you know, let's pull the funding on that because we haven't had to use it. We had the Indonesian tsunami. Now we have a complete network of dark buoys all the way across the Pacific. We work collaboratively with all of the nations of the Pacific Islands, and the Pacific Basin. Other folks are helping us to support their buoys. When we had our recent tsunami event here on the coast, I was at Hatfield Marine Science Center talking to some of our researchers that were talking to researchers in Seattle. And you as a public citizen, you could click on that buoy page, go to other buoys, get the whole Pacific, and every dark buoy was flashing. That meant it was under a warning. And you could actually watch the wave go across the ocean and find out how close the forecasts were to what we were actually seeing. That's the only reason that I was at Hatfield Marine Science Center instead of someplace 50 feet above sea level. Another part of NOAA that I talked about, National Ocean Service. So that's a ship on the East Coast, Thomas Jefferson, who was our forefather of the Coast and Geodetic Survey. So to go out and do a survey of the coast. So we named the ship after him. So that's doing that multi-beam mapping. You know, you've heard a lot about territorial sea mapping here in Oregon. We haven't done the work with NOAA, but we've supported it with funding. National Marine Sanctuary Program is another big part of the National Ocean Service that does, again, a lot of education, outreach. It protects the nation's trust resources like the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Florida Keys, places, the Olympic Coast Sanctuary, Monterey Bay, those places. We don't have a sanctuary off the coast of Oregon yet, and it's pretty contentious and not something that I'd be willing to talk about since I don't know that much about it. But again, a great opportunity for learning more about the natural world and protecting our trust resources. On the tsunami buoys, you'll hear DART, Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis. It's amazing to me that this thing that's anchored out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean can monitor a few millimeter rise and fall of a standing wave and separate that out from the stormy weather that it normally experiences. What do you do if you're looking for tsunami information? NOAA's got good information. We're hopeful that local sources of information are probably going to be your best source for where to go, what to do. But everybody, one of the reasons I'm here in Oregon, I used to live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Our laboratory got wiped out. My mother-in-law's house got wiped out. A lot of my friends and family, a lot of our coworkers' houses got wiped out. We moved to Oregon. After the hurricane on the Gulf Coast, if you were waiting on FEMA or the Red Cross or somebody to come give you a hand, you'd probably be waiting a long time. So I relate that to us. If and when we have a subduction fault and we have a tsunami here on the Oregon coast, I hope you already have a plan. I hope you already have a lot of friends and neighbors, and that you know what you think you're going to do. Because if all these bridges are gone and we're stuck out here on the coast, it's going to be all of us working together to get through it. So these things will help warn us of how bad it's going to be, but please be prepared on the backside for yourself. What are we going to do? So NOAA's an international organization, offices all over the country. A lot of folks said, oh, NOAA's coming to Newport. Well, NOAA's been in Newport. But NOAA's also up in Portland. We've got our National Marine Fisheries Service Northwest Regional Office. The way that marine fisheries in the United States waters are managed is through the Marine Fisheries Councils and Commissions. So the Pacific Marine Fisheries Council is based out of Portland, Oregon. It takes care of fisheries on the entire West Coast. We also have the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, which does a lot of work with the states for nearshore and anadromous stocks that migrate from California, Washington, into Oregon, like salmon. So it's important for us to have a regional office up there in Portland. National Weather Service River Forecast, they're monitoring the Columbia River, the Willamette, and all the other streams. There are places on that Weather Service page that if you want to know what's happening to the Alsea River, you can go to that and it will give you the current river level stages, at all of the observation points and what's happening with that. We also have a couple of folks with the National Ocean Service. We only have about 4 of them in the entire state, but a few have just recently moved to Portland, and I'm working with them very closely on a lot of West Coast Governors Agreement issues where we're providing support for education outreach and information to the resource managers, to the politicals that are going to be involved in doing things. Those folks work closely with the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve down in Charleston. They do a lot of things for the South Central Coast in providing research opportunities for folks down there in that area. Up at Hammond, at the mouth of the Columbia River, we have our newer 1930 U.S. Coast Guard station that we've converted into office spaces and a little bit of lab space. I say newer because the 1870s building that they originally had on the site, they took down and built this one. And when the Coast Guard didn't want it because the river silted up and the river moved further away from this life-saving station, now there's condominiums and roads and houses between this station and the river. They didn't have a need for it, and we took it. So I've got folks that are working in this great, wonderful old building. If you've ever driven north on 101 and you get to Garibaldi and you see the Coast Guard station that's sitting right there, this is a sister building to that. So those are 2 really historic buildings. And if you haven't noticed it, look for the white clapboard building with the red tile roof. It's got the Coast Guard sign out in front of it. So, 1930s construction, and they've weathered many a storm. Statewide, we have Office of Law Enforcement personnel, and like I pointed out, the weather data buoys and things. So there's infrastructure that NOAA is responsible for all over. When you get down to here in Newport, Northwest Fisheries Science Center, folks that I work for, we do work mostly on groundfish, hake, rockfish, salmon. The Alaska Fisheries Science Center. Why is the Alaska Fisheries Science Center in Newport, Oregon? The Hatfield Marine Science Center has some of the highest quality seawater of any of our research facilities on the West Coast. Better than Scripps, better than Santa Cruz, better than the brand new laboratory we just built for Senator Stevens, bless his soul, up in Kodiak, Alaska, and the Ted Stevens Marine Institute in Auk Bay, Alaska, up by Juneau. So we have such good quality seawater that we pull in because of where Newport's oriented. As we get this surge of salt water at the high tide, we pump for 2 hours with 4 pumps at full speed to fill up 2 big reservoirs on the Hatfield campus. And then through the low tide cycle, we filter that seawater, chill it, and pump it through all the laboratory spaces. So they do research here. And at one point, it was the Northwest and Alaska Fisheries Science Center, and then for political reasons, we split it off to the Alaska Fisheries Center and the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. We also have folks with NOAA's research program, and that's kind of a misnomer, but they do a lot of work with that's more academic. They're doing things like tsunami research, like the El Nino research. They're looking at the submerged volcanoes and the Ring of Fire in the Pacific. So you have world-renowned experts in a variety of these fields that are your friends and neighbors and colleagues here in Yachats, Walport, Newport, Lincoln City.
You were talking about they were testing the fish down in the Gulf. Are they going to be testing the fish coming from Japan?
What we're doing right now, thankfulully, most of the radioactive iodine has a very short life cycle. So it's dissipating very quickly. You can identify it in the air, but not much. What we're doing right now is we do have some cruises planned in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands in the Aleutian chain, that as that water starts moving into U.S. areas, we're going to be conducting some surveillance of the water itself. There is some interest by the commercial fishing industry to start looking at fish. There are other researchers, academic researchers from Woods Hole Oceanographic, that they are on ships offshore of Japan, and they're starting to look at how is that water that's been released from those reactors, how that's moving out into the ocean. So we're actively planning right now how to do some monitoring for that and how we can use our existing resources to do it. But the bad news is there's a big spill. The good news, if it could be good news, is that there's an awful lot of dilution. So we'll have to see where that goes. We have a lot of partners. Oregon State University is a huge partner. Obviously, Dr. Levchenko is the director of NOAA. She came from OSU, but we've had several senior NOAA researchers that retired from NOAA and took positions with Oregon State University. Dr. Rick Spinrad is one of the vice provosts for research. Dr. Stephen Brandt is the head of Oregon Sea Grant. So if anybody's ever done anything with Oregon Sea Grant Extension or gone to the visitor center, those folks do a heck of a job. We also, Oregon State University is somewhat unique in that we have two cooperative institutes that are located at OSU. So a lot of the labor for some of our short-term research projects, we do collaboratively through the cooperative institutes, because if the money's not going to be there long-term, I wouldn't be prudent for me to hire people to do that long-term work if it may be just an exploratory piece of the work. But great folks, it's great ways for people to get into the research community. And we hire a lot of them. A lot of times when I'm talking to political, they're like, man, science, that's nice, but what's your economic impact? Well, right now, just a little piece of NOAA that's at Hatfield is about $8 million. So we have around 60 federal employed scientists. I also support about another 60 to 70 Oregon State University researchers, guest researchers, contractors with Pacific States, different folks. So in my 4 buildings that I have on the Hatfield campus, I'm supporting about 140 people. We do a lot of students during the summer. Depending on the number of grants and things that people get, the dollar value goes up and down. But so we're a pretty significant contribution. You can read the News Times, the economic reports and things of what the impact of the NOAA Homeport piece will be. We're still talking around 150 to 170 people. About 100 of those are going to be on the ships. About 60 of them are going to be in the lab, or not the lab, in the administration and the maintenance buildings. They're not really the scientists. They support this research through maintenance of the ships. So if that's somewhere between $8 and $20 million a year, and we're about $8 million, it's somewhere between $16 and $28 million a year of direct impact just by NOAA, just in Newport. And that doesn't count like big shipyards and things like that. So my part of NOAA, Northwest Fishery Science Center, it's been very Puget Sound centric. It's Columbia River, looking at the dam passage for salmon. And of course, the most important ocean research port is Newport Research Station. Only because I live here. We do a lot of things that we're trying to embrace an ecosystem-based approach to management. looking at the large marine ecosystem of the California current. You can't just study any single piece of it and understand the entire picture. But we have, over 28 species of salmon and steelhead that are evolutionary significant units. A lot of streams may have 1, 2, or 3 runs that are completely unique to the rest of the country. Southern resident killer whales I talked about, commercial fishing for groundfish. It's a huge area, and we share a lot of that research with our colleagues at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. So we're looking at that sort of network of ecosystem-based management. We're looking at habitat restoration. Where's the right place to put money to restore habitat? Oceans and human health issues, not just how safe is your seafood because there might be oil toxicity in it from the new Carissa or something else, but what about when I shut down the razor clam beds because there's too much domalic acid in the ocean, or like right now down in California, we're having a lot of die-offs because there are certain harmful algae that are being fed on going up through the food chain and killing seals and sea lions and dolphins.
Like all those sardines that died of.
Well, that one's a different issue where they kind of got crowded into a small place, and there's a lot of question as to whether it was an oxygen depletion or something else that caused that.
That was horrible looking.
Yeah, but I mean, people here, you've seen when we've had those hypoxic events here, and all of a sudden at low tide, there's dead crabs and sea stars and things all over the place. So an awful lot of things that can happen that for hundreds of years of science, we're still trying to understand it. Recovery, rebuilding, sustainability of marine and anadromous species. Those are some of the 4 big drivers for my bosses and for me. Something as simple as salmon. We've been studying salmon ever since the first man grabbed one out of a bear's mouth as it was swimming up a river somewhere and tried to figure out where do they go, why do they come back? And from everything that we think we know, we keep learning new things that add more questions. So like for steelhead, we know that steelhead leave the west coast and they show up out here, but we're not exactly sure which way do they go. They go that way, or they go that way. If you're trying to protect the ocean environment for them, you really need to figure out where they're going. Right now, every year, we tag millions of salmon, both wild and hatchery fish, with this little pit tag, passive integrated transducer. It's just like the little tag that goes in your pet's between their shoulder blades, so that if that pet's found, they can wave the wand over it and boom, it gives it, sort of the pet's social security number, who it belongs to. We put these in the salmon. Each salmon then becomes a unique individual, and as it goes past each of the dams on the river, we can monitor, okay, that salmon made it past that dam. And you get to certain places where, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of predators in a certain area, largemouth bass, blue catfish, something like that. Or there's some problem with the amount of water coming out and you don't get a lot of passage, then those are places where the Bonneville Power Administration knows they need to focus efforts in order to enhance the ability of those juvenile salmon to get out. Well, in addition to getting the salmon out past the dams and out to the ocean, additional information can be done with these slightly larger acoustic tags. So these are much more expensive. This is about the size of a grain of rice. This is about the size of a cuticle on your little finger. We do some minor surgery, make a little incision, implant the tag, stitch it up, put the steelhead back in the river, and hope that we'll get some records for them. But having sensors out in the ocean is extremely expensive. We know that elephant seals migrate from Southern California out to that same area. We already have permits where they're tagging a number of these elephant seals to look at their critical habitat. So inside these sensors, we also put some acoustic tag sensors. We're hoping this year to get a satellite link from an elephant seal in the same place that the steelhead are out to try to find out when do the 2 of those show up at the same place at the same time. A lot of what we do out in Newport, we call this the Newport lines. We do oceanographic research where we're looking and analyzing water quality, temperature, productivity. A lot of the productivity is looking at the copepods and euphausids and the bases of the food chain. We can get all the salmon past the dams that the hatcheries can produce. We can restore all the habitat, get those fish out there. But if they get out there this size and there's nothing to eat, you don't get them this size coming back because they're going to go out there and starve, or they're going to be subject to more predation. We have huge issues with cormorants and with terns in the river itself. A lot of birds have figured out that, oh, there's a healthy population of juvenile fish coming down the river at certain times of the year. Good time to hatch out my eggs and have plenty of food to feed the chicks. So we're learning that we can forecast what the returns of salmon might be based on things like Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the El Nino Index, sea surface temperatures, upwelling. Everybody knows what upwelling is, right? So when the wind blows out of the north, it's good for salmon because it blows out of the north, pushes the surface water off, pulls up the deep ocean water. That's nutrient rich. That fertilizes those near shore and surface waters. That's just like fertilizing your garden. You get the plankters, phytoplankters growing, that creates food for the zooplankers. Zooplankers are food for all the in-between species. So this was our forecast for 2009, 2010. Based on these factors, it all looked pretty good. And last year, if you were a salmon biologist, it was a great year to retire. Because we had more salmon in the Fraser River, we had fish going to Redfish Lake, we had fish showing up in places they hadn't seen in a long time. The right number of fish got out, ocean conditions were good, a lot of fish made it back in. This year, 11 and 12, not so good. And we're starting to see that even though some of the ocean fisheries are pretty healthy, because those will be fish for another year, some of the returns we're thinking might be weaker than they have been the last 2 years. Why do we look at ocean conditions? 2 years ago, a La Nina year, incredibly warm California current. A lot of guys that should normally be, this Humboldt squid, that should normally be way south, hanging out in California, hanging out off of Baja, came all the way up to southeast Alaska. A couple of boats got so choked with Humboldt when they were out fishing for other things, they dumped them, so this black bear just took advantage of the situation, and you got a calamari for lunch there. We're obviously concerned about any time there's a big disruption in the environment, because if you have a major predator that grows very quickly, these squid only live like 2 years, what are they going to do to the native resources? We actually had some salmon caught in the lower Columbia River that had pretty characteristic squid beak marks on them. So, these are the reasons that we do the things we do. And every time we think we know what's going on, nature throws us a curveball. The guys in Alaska that work here in Newport, they're much smarter than us field biologists. They do all their work inside. You would never know if you drive on the Hatfield campus. Many of the roofs, many of the little sort of innocuous outbuildings, we've got 4-year-old halibut that they've raised since they were first caught up in the Gulf of Alaska. They've got cod that come up to you like little puppy dogs. They've got black cod, a variety of other soles and other flatfish. Where they're doing research here in Newport on Alaska stocks, also king crabs and snow crabs, looking at their behavior and how they interact with fishing gear, with each other, predator-prey analysis. How can they come up with better excluder devices so we don't have bycatch? The shrimp fishery doesn't want to catch halibut because it catches too many halibut, it's going to shut them down. So if we can put an excluder grate in, get the halibut out, get some of the other finfish out, and have a clean catch of shrimp, then you can get MSC certification, you're a sustainable fishery, you're having very low impact. We here in Oregon, we're amazingly blessed because you've got aquaculture raised oysters, you've got hook and line caught albacore, hook and line caught low bycatch Chinook salmon, you've got well-managed halibut, ling cod are just doing gangbusters this year. If you like to eat seafood, and I do, Oregon's a great place to be. So the FINS program, they do work all over the Pacific Basin, but one of the reasons that they're here is our friend the Cascadia subduction zone. So every time we have a tsunami alert, I'm on the phone with those guys, 2 o'clock in the morning, saying, okay, what do the models look like? How bad is it going to be? So everybody that lives here, have a plan. If you don't hear anything else I say tonight, have a plan. The earthquake, or the submerged volcanoes and the things they do, if you go to their websites, they'll have like the underwater video from some of the things that they've done. They'll have the axial seamount. They'll have sound where you can hear the volcano erupting. Just imagine if you're homeschooling kids, or if you know a teacher, science teacher, any place in the country, and you can get to that kind of information, that makes it tangible. You know, here's stuff that's going on in your world. If you think that video game is cool, check this out. You know. So even though we don't have a big mapping presence here yet, until the Rainier and the fair weather come down, NOAA has awarded $5 million over the last 3 years to Oregon to do some analysis of the coastal mapping, and we've pretty much remapped a lot of the nearshore waters. The surveys, if you look at the paper charts and you're looking offshore, you'll see survey dates of 1870, 1890, back when they were chunking a line over the side with a weight and a piece of wax on the end and pulling it up and saying, oh, that's gray mud or that's shell, because that part of the ocean hasn't changed a lot. But stuff in the near shore where you have sedimentation, that's changed a lot. And that's important because you don't want to run aground, especially if you're running a big tanker or a big freighter or something that's headed for the Columbia River. So a couple of my guys were diving, doing a hull check. We were down off the Silver Banks down in the Caribbean. It happens to be a good nursery area for humpback whales and sperm whales. And looked over the shoulder and somebody was checking us out too, so maybe we're not the only ones studying the ocean. So, that's my chat. Sorry if I went over a little too much. Any questions? Ma'am?
A few years back, probably 12, 15, we were living in Gulfport, Mississippi, and there was a NOAA ship that was newly chartered. I can't think of the name of it, but I think it was one of those acoustic ones you were talking about. Do you have any idea what that might have been?
How long ago was it?
It was, when were we there?
97.
97.
Okay, so that was the one that I was on. That was Gordon Gunner. So we also have the Pisces down there too.
It was bad.
Did you get to go to it?
We
Yeah, I'm from Ocean Springs, so.
Tour. Some of the riparian projects and stuff in the watersheds around here requires up to 2 years to get okay or something from NOAA. Yet, when you did your docks up there, Wyden called up and it only took 2 days.
No, it took more than 2 days. They were working for almost a year on getting the in-water permits.
I know, but they weren't issuing it. Till
But
Wyden
what
called.
they did, is that they went through the same paperwork that other folks had to go through. Sir?
From what you're saying, it sounds like there's a fair amount of overlap with what EPA is trying to do with endangered species and whatnot. Do you collaborate with EPA quite a bit?
All of the federal agencies are mandated to uphold the laws of the land. The things that EPA does or that U.S. Fish and Wildlife do to approach Endangered Species Act are slightly different. Fish and Wildlife Service has oversight over all of the birds and things. We have all the marine mammals, turtles, and the anadromous fish. The EPA is looking at some different rules and regulations.
Homeland Security has staff in the port. Collaborate with them.
The only Homeland Security staff that I'm aware of is U.S. Customs and Coast Guard. And yes, I collaborate with Coast Guard regularly.
NOAA, like NASA, seems to have an internal hierarchy or organizational thing with titles, but it's not military, it's civilian. Who determines that whole structure?
It's mostly historical, but as it's grown or changes, things have to go through all the way up to the White House before you have an organizational change. So it would be the Office of Personnel Management, Office of Management and Budget would ultimately have final say, and then the White House would say, okay, we've approved a reorganization. So like you may hear that NOAA wants to create a climate office. That climate office that the Congress is not going to allow NOAA to create this year would have to go through the Office of Management and Budget to the White House to create this organization.
Is the coastal geodetic survey part of your?
Yes, it
part of
is.
NOAA?
Yes, it is. And that's the part that I've got my shirt on tonight that says 200 years of science. The last administration kind of took credit that we had 200 years of the Coastal Geodetic Survey's science. And since they're part of NOAA, we have embraced that as our own.
After the Alaska earthquake, there seemed to be a coastal geodetic survey ship out in the Gulf of Alaska remapping. Do you know the name of that ship?
It might have been the Rainier or the Fairweather, because those two are up
Fairweather being built.
Yeah. Yeah. Right?
Short question. How did the Rainier get named Rainier?
Mount Mitchell, Rainier, and Fairweather are all named for mountains. The fisheries boats are all named for fisheries researchers. Bell Shimada, Miller Freeman, David Starr Jordan, Gordon Gunter. They're all of them except the Pisces. The Pisces in the Gulf of Mexico was going to be named after a researcher, but because the southeastern senators didn't like the name, they pulled it and we had to give it a different name.
Sounds like there was some Northwestern advocacy to get that.
No, it was actually a New England advocacy that changed that name. All right. Okay, well, go ahead.
Is NOAA involved at all with any of the waste technology?
A little bit. We'll be involved a little bit in the permitting, but we're very interested, and a lot of our researchers are working because obviously things that are natural or things that are transboundary, highly migratory marine mammals, any habitat changes, we want to be on top of that and find out what's the impact if we create huge wave energy farms on the West Coast. So, all right. Thanks a lot, folks. I really appreciate it.